So I want to discuss a little bit the issue of grammar Nazis, grammar communists, grammar Puritans, whatever way you want to describe such people. Um, this I think started off as one of the internet memes, um, as a way to sort of criticize those who feel this compulsive need to always correct the grammar of others. Now, I'm going to say something from the outset of this video and may surprise some people. I actually come from a teaching background. Um, I've done a variety of different teaching work. I have qualifications in certain teaching disciplines, and I've got experience, significant experience in classrooms and with working with individuals, developing their skills, developing their various skill levels, everything from beginners to intermediate to post-intermediate. Um, so I do know something about the world of teaching. And by the way, just a disclaimer, sometimes people get all funny about this. They think that if you talk about your professional line, it's some big taboo thing. I'm not talking about any specific business or school or institution, so there's no legal issues here. There's nothing that's um, legally dubious. I don't know why people get I can understand if someone's talking about their business because then their opinions reflects on that business. But at this particular moment, I'm not employed by any company or school, so there's nothing there. There's no kind of legal repercussions for me talking about my line of work. I have to say, I get a little bit irritated when some of my fellow teachers behave this way because every time, well, first of all, here's the thing. We live in a world where digital communication has definitely changed the way people communicate. So text message culture, for instance, has led to people sending a lot of messages in abbreviated format, for instance. And I agree that has had, in some ways, a negative influence on how people communicate. I also agree that there are some people who have such a bad grasp of grammar. Obviously, I'm talking here about English because other languages have different grammar structures, but sticking with English, there are some people whose grammar is so bad that it becomes basically unreadable. But what I'm talking about is those people who feel this compulsive need to point out the tiniest mistakes. So I've just had experience of it, in fact, which is partly what's prompted me to make this video. I was discussing some issue that had nothing to do with teaching or language or anything like that. And I made a typo. I meant to write half, HALF, and I wrote have, HAVE. Sometimes my keyboard can be a bit slow, so I was typing fast. It was a typo. Happens. And this smug prick decided to attack me on that basis. And I must admit, it did irritate me because it's so petty. I really think that if your point of attack is what someone's grammar is like, you really need to, have a word with yourself. I can understand in certain arguments, say for instance, someone is bashing immigrants for not speaking English properly and they have very bad grammar. That's legitimate to attack that because that shows their hypocrisy. But if someone's talking about an issue that has nothing to do with language, linguistics, and and they've made a small typo, or the grammar isn't 100% perfect for whatever reason, it doesn't make you morally upright by focusing in on that and attacking them. It just makes you look like a very petty person. Um, and I've no respect for it. And I think sometimes it can give teachers a bad image, actually. A good teacher will obviously be comprehensive, they'll obviously bring the students through these issues. But I believe a good teacher also makes the students aware of the real world. And in the real world, the fact of the matter is, most people, and this might be controversial me saying this, but most people do not obsess about grammar in the way that certain teaching people do. Now, obviously, if you're preparing your students for an exam, and if you're teaching them about grammar disciplines, that's teaching. That's what you do. But I don't think it's a good influence to indicate that every time you're debating with someone about something, you point out their grammar mistakes. It just indicates to me that you don't really have an argument, and that's all you could do. There's also many reasons why people may not have perfect grammar. I mentioned the issue about digital technology having a negative role, but there's other issues. I have, let's say he's a friend. He's a guy I know reasonably well, and I like the guy. He's a good guy. He has dyslexia. It doesn't mean that he's not smart. It doesn't mean he's not creative. It just means that sometimes he doesn't structure his sentences as well as maybe he would like. Now, I when I see grammar Nazis kind of imposing these diktats on people and homing in on them, I think of people like that. And it must be very frustrating for people who suffer from issues like dyslexia to be constantly patronized in that way and constantly kind of belittled and run down. It's actually a borderline bullying, as far as I'm concerned. Borderline. And I just think it's a pathetic way to counter someone's opinion. Like I say, if someone is ranting about immigrants and their grammar is bad, that's a different matter because that comes into their own hypocrisy. But as a general basis, I really, really think that it's not the most important of things. And people who think it is, firstly, they must really be the life and soul of the party. It shows to me what a petty type of person they really are. But it just isn't. It shouldn't be used as a way to attack someone. Sometimes I don't always express myself in exactly the way that I would like because there's a lot on my mind at a given time, and sometimes I'm trying to find the right word, or I'm trying to express something in a certain way. And yet, most people I know would say I'm pretty intelligent. So, how someone communicates certainly has implications. We see this in the world of politics, it's critical. Someone who's really smooth and they know how to talk is generally going to do pretty well. But that's not always true. I mean, if we look at the case of Donald Trump, his grammar is famously not that sound, and he says what's on his mind, and he's arguably been electorally very successful. And I think it's partly because it resonates with this idea of being a real person, so to speak. I don't happen to believe he is. I think he's insincere in a lot of areas, but that's how it resonates. And I would simply say by the way, some people might not like the term grammar Nazi. They might say I'm being hypocritical by saying that, but it's kind of tongue in cheek. And it's kind of pointing to the fact that you're being so petty and controlling. So that's why there's an analogy with a totalitarian regime. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're an actual Nazi, but it can look quite obnoxious and it can look very smug, and no one's going to thank you for it. No one's going to turn around and say, "Oh, thank you for correcting my grammar." No, they're going to be thinking you smug so and so. Just how dare you belittle me? So those are just a few things I think people should think about. Once again, coming from a teaching background, I absolutely appreciate the importance of instilling grammar knowledge. That's not what I take issue with. What I take issue with is those people who bring it into real world scenarios all the time to focus on tiny little things. If someone's made a typo, you don't need to point it out. All that indicates is the narrowness of your thinking, that you cannot counter whatever argument they've made. All you can do is focus on a typo. So I think it's a little bit pathetic. Um, and yeah, it does irritate me a bit. So let me know your thoughts. And, like I say, communication is important. And if people have such, strong, or let's say if they have such a implausible type of communication whereby what they're saying just doesn't make sense. That's obviously problematic. I think this also applies to strong regional accents. Um, for example, someone that has a very pronounced accent and they always use strong local dialects would probably find it a bit hard to get into international teaching because they confuse international students when they're meant to be teaching um, basic English, standard English. But if they put that regional accent Not take away the accent, but certainly take away the dialects. That's a different matter. So, I totally understand that teaching does require certain approaches, but I would never ever, tell a student they're an idiot or ridicule them or talk down to them because they've made grammar mistakes. I would point out where they are wrong and help them. And that's true of the real world. I'm not going to attack someone because of their grammar errors. I might attack them on the points that they're making. I might disagree with the points they're making. And if it is so inaudible, if the grammar is so bad that I can't read it, I will tell them that. But small mistakes really are not worth focusing on. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers.